Hello everyone. The Dragon Empery certainly is a faction in this game. Being based on the Chinese, it's easy to question why they're here in the first place. Not to downplay China's involvement in the Second World War, but their role was not naval in the slightest. Nor did they have any superpower navy ambitions like a certain group of vodka juggers. This has led to an overall reduced presence, where their only source of content is Lunar New Year's, which is at least consistent, and story relevance is squeezing themselves into the recent Eagle Union event. Due to their lack of shipbuilding, many of their warships were imported, and recently we've getting some rather obscure paper ships, so let's delve into this limited presence and see where they come from. Let's start with the original faces. Yat-sen is one of the faces of the faction, and rather representative of Chinese shipbuilding at the time. Many of their warships still used reciprocating steam engines long after turbines had taken over the role of propelling major service combatants, and some were even still coal-fired. Naturally, since I'm talking about Chinese shipbuilding here, she's indigenous to her country. The other two originals are slightly more interesting. The Ninghai sisters are the result of China's growing naval ambitions. After negotiating with many countries, they were ordered from Japan, based somewhat on the experimental cruiser Yubari. Ninghai was built in Japan and rather smoothly entered service, while the slightly modified Pinghai was built in China with aid from Japanese expertise, and had a rougher time thanks to the growing Sino-Japanese tensions. The 4 Anshan class are some of the Empery's most notorious. These were the first destroyers to be operated by the newly formed People's Liberation Army Navy. And if you think Army Navy is stupid, wait till you hear the name of their naval aviation. They were originally Soviet Nevny class, and the worn-out ships were bought from the Soviet Union for the equivalent of 17 tons of gold apiece. These would go on to serve until around 1990, having been retrofitted with Silkworm anti-ship missiles during midlife upgrades. Chao Ho and Ying Sui are half-sister protected cruisers built in the 1910s from British shipyards Armstrong, Whitworth and Vickers. Interestingly, despite all 3 sisters being built to the same basic design, a third was built in the States and ended up in Greece due to the collapse of the Qing dynasty, many of their characteristics, including size, propulsion and weapons, varied. This was done in an effort to increase the education value of these ships, allowing Chinese sailors to get acquainted with many different types of systems. They were also the first Chinese ships to use steam turbines, and be capable of burning fuel oil. Shangfeng, Fui Yuan and Fu Po all belonged to the Shangfeng class destroyers originally ordered by the Qing dynasty from Germany. By the time they'd been launched, said dynasty had collapsed and the ships were inherited by the Republic of China. Despite being German-built, their armament is British. The 2 Hai Chi class, those being the Nain ship and her sister Hai Tian, were a pair of protected cruisers ordered from Armstrong Whitworth, entering service right at the end of the 19th century, making them among the oldest ships in the game that can move under their own power. Hai Yung is the only one of her 3-ship family to be represented in-game. These protected cruisers were ordered in the mid-1890s from the German shipbuilders Aquitaine Gesellschaft Wolkenstetten, AG Wolkenstetten, as part of an initially ambitious plan to rebuild China's navy, after following the First Sino-Japanese War. Ting An was originally a German transport ship who, during World War I, amongst other ships, was seized by the Chinese and taken as their own. She would later be converted into a seaplane tender. Speaking of seaplane tenders, Chen Hai was originally a German merchant ship built in 1904, until she was acquired by China. She would later be purchased by the Navy and converted into a gunboat. Under a new name, she would serve in that role for a few years until she was modified to carry a couple of seaplanes in 1926. Hwaja is similar, being instead an Austro-Hungarian merchant ship. He was captured during World War I and passed about as a transport ship until her conversion in 1927. Now for the paper ships. Lung Wu and Hu Pen, according to their in-game introductions, are a Wolkenstetten design for a 1,000-ton torpedo destroyer, As part of their attempts to rearm their navy, the Republic of China began ordering destroyers from foreign nations. These in particular were 6 modern capable ships ordered in 1913, but were cancelled by the outbreak of World War I, though the German V-25DDs had very similar numbers and characteristics when they joined their navy in 1914. Qianwu is known as Chinese Cruiser Number 68, or the Monfalcone Large Cruiser. This armoured cruiser was to be built in Cantiere Navale Triestino, which at the time was located in Austria-Hungary despite being largely Italian in heritage, and where it ended up after the fact. The number is named after the shipyard it was built in, it didn't actually get much of a name. Said war also torpedoed this ship as construction had been halted during the war, and internal turmoil within China meant they could not afford to have the ship completed to its new revised design, and what little materials had been laid down and gathered would end up being scrap. Her smaller cousins, known as the number 64s, or Monfalcone Light Cruisers, is what Xi'an is based off of. Much like their large counterparts, they were laid down, interrupted by the Great War, and then scrapped after the fact because China could no longer afford them. Huanshan was to be one of a pair of 26,000-ton battle cruisers, envisioned under the 1913 First Naval Shipbuilding Plan. A massive plan to build a largely defensive navy. These 10 343mm gun, 28-knot ships didn't get anywhere close to being laid down, and the plan was vastly out of China's scope at the time, not to mention how difficult fitting those kind of specs on a 26,000-ton hull is. The outbreak of World War I in the next year would also not help, as any foreign shipyard that could build it, had they been contracted to do so, would likely have had it seized by its country for their war effort. Finally, their only research ship, Harbin. Harbin is based off a post-World War II Soviet design for a small anti-aircraft cruiser from the MLK series. In this case, she's based on the 10-gun version that Wargaming called MK6. Their idea was that if the Soviets built any of these designs, which they didn't, one of them could have been transferred to or bought by China. Obviously this didn't happen, but Wargaming just made it up anyway, and now we have it through the PR system. Alright, that's the lot of them. Every China boat and where they came from. Honestly, they are saved by the fact we don't get low rarities anymore, because most of these are ancient and would not be anything more than gusher filler otherwise. That and retrofits. I'd say it kinda sucks they eat up a good portion of the yearly retrofit budget, but we get so few each year that every ship does that anyway. Yapping aside, that's all for this one, so until next time, fair winds and following seas.